In the Emerald Isle, something unexplainable is happening. Tonight, prepare to witness the most frightening event in horror podcast history. A journey into the depths of horror history. First Class Horror presents the Class Horror Cast. Evil wears many masks, but pure horror wears only one. Support First Class Horror on Patreon for as little as $1. Can't get enough of the horror? Carve yourself a deal from official merchandise, only on Teespring. Join us on all social media at First Class Horror. We have such sights to show you.
Bobby Rowe is an actor, director and screenwriter most famously known for his films The Houses October Built 1 and 2. He has also written a children's book, Narah and the Unicorn. During my conversation we talk about his love for horror, the haunt industry, the long-awaited sequels to The Houses October Built, following your passion and his upcoming projects such as A Wicked Tale. Bobby has an extremely vast knowledge of the industry and I hope you guys enjoy this as much as I did. Okay, so yeah, a lot of people had reached out to me with just little comments and some questions and stuff. So I'm just going to run through some of them.
Sure.
Some of them might overlap, so I'll cut out as much of that as I can. Okay, so first question I got was from Notorious_Tom. He said, I enjoyed both movies, fantastic job and incredibly unique ideas. The girl was extremely unsettling. I don't have any questions regarding the movies, although I would like to ask Bobby if he could be any type of criminal, what would he be? And it can be from any time period.
Did you say any type of criminal?
Criminal, yeah. Bizarre question.
Okay. Never been asked that before. I guess you know, bank robber, right? Like point break style. You don't hurt anybody. You just try to mastermind something, and walk away scot-free.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would probably answer the same.
Yeah, that's a fair way to answer it without hurting him.
Okay, so I have another question here from Q for Killers. He says, I love these movies. The real footage and news reports brought a gritty reality to the story. Were you happy with the second movie?
Yes, I very much was. Like we kind of discussed, it's an eye-opening movie for different events, for Halloween events here in the States of places you've never even imagined existed. At least I hadn't. And you know, I personally, I really enjoyed the last 10 minutes. In a perfect world, I wanted it to be a continuous shot. But also, like we discussed before, that is time equals money, and it's very tough to pull all that off. So, you know, if I ever had my way, a continuous shot of the final walkthrough with Brandy would have been awesome, but impractical for what we were having to do in the short amount of time.
He also asks, was the Porcelain Girl's scream in the first movie scripted?
We tried it a couple different ways. But her going on there, we were trying to also make it be weird. So the objective was more to be weird than it was scary. And I know that I'm glad that it bothers people probably more than any scene in the movie, like in a scare way. Mm-hmm. But the objective too would just be, once again, weird. So it wasn't enough that it was threatening that we needed to go home. Right? She didn't threaten our lives. She didn't do any of that where we thought we'd gone too far. Try to make it as strange as possible so it's unsettling instead to let us continue on our journey.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. And he also asked, was the original ending for the main characters to be buried alive and not dug up, therefore being killed? Which I think you've basically already answered that.
Right. Well, yeah, you'll see in part 2.
Okay, so let's see. So I have another one here from AS4MS. Love these movies, rewatch them every year. Love the first more than the sequel. The realistic characters and unsettling nature was really effective. The sequel did not capture this as much for me. However, are we getting a third installment? And if so, when? And what can you tell us?
Yes, we hope to do a 3. It would be in a different direction than part 1 and 2, but by design. So I find that I think that'll be a very interesting kind of turn of events. Mm-hmm. And that's about all I can kind of tell you on what we're going to do with that.
But you do have, have you got, I think at the start you said there was 4 movies originally you kind of had in mind. Are those like fully fleshed out ideas? Or do you have like an idea of, where you want to take the...
No, they're fully fleshed out. So basically, especially in the found footage world, a lot of that genre is kind of gone by the wayside. It's not a lot of things. Not a lot of buyers want found footage right now. They want more recognizable stars, that kind of thing. So it was important for Zach and I to kind of, almost do one for them, one for us. So before we were going to tackle HOB3, we were doing A Wicked Tale, which is a more standard narrative horror feature with the producers of The Walking Dead. So we're excited about that. Zach and I have actually spent almost 3 years on that project and that script. So we're kind of excited to get into you know what I mean? Like the get out of found footage, because it's somewhat of a jail sometimes, and which I really don't fully understand just because of its nature and its look. Mm-hmm. People think it's easy in maybe some ways, but what they're forgetting is, especially with actors, is you don't have the luxury of coverage. And by that, I mean, they need to do what they need to do in one take. And so you don't have a lot of choices in the edit bay. So I think a lot of weight is on the shoulders of actors in movies like this, which I think, will incorporate into, learning that style and using that into a normal feature.
That's something actually I want to get into in a second about some of those other projects. But so I Am the Golden God asks, he says, I love these movies. I've been curious if the ending was supposed to be up for interpretation or not. I've seen the movie now several times and I'm still not sure if it's an actual haunt or if it's a went wrong for them.
Think of it almost as if the top falls in Inception, mm-hmm. right? Like it was supposed to make you think, which way is this going? And the intention was to have you argue on the way to the car, right? Yeah. When you leave the theater. And we just always thought that was a little more fun to do that. And instead of giving you a definitive bow around it, that was never what we wanted to do. But I know that pisses some people off, right? They need their bow on it. And that just doesn't really interest us.
Yeah. He also says, given its critical success and the success of movies like Hell House, do you feel like that this is an unexplored subgenre?
I think it was. When we started it, we could not even reference one other movie. There's Hooper's Funhouse, but that's Carnival. That's a different thing. Mm-hmm. So we couldn't really even equate it to anything else, which excited us. We liked. Now I think I'm not saying it's watered down. I think there's tons of ways to explore this, and I'd probably sign up for all of them. So I think that, Hell Houses is, supernatural. Haunt is the psycho killers. Ours hopefully is the grounded, the grounded what if road trip. Mm-hmm. Ours is more, we always talk about it being a Halloween adventure. So I think there's tons of avenues you can still explore, and the spaces are endless, and the imagination of these builders and these haunt owners and these scare actors is infinite. It's fantastic to walk through, and everybody seems to have a different spin on upping the ante each year. So I don't think it gets old at all. I mean, you can go back, and then there's the documentary version with Haunters Art of the Scare. That was great too, and showing the Tammy Manor from inside. So I think it was untapped. It's tapped, but not tapped out.
Yeah, and like there's a lot of other I don't know if you'd call them mainstream, but like there's a lot of YouTube channels and podcasts out there. There's a guy, the Lights Out podcast. He's quite popular. Like he's even started to do episodes on different haunts like McCamey and different ones from throughout America, which it kind of shows you like there's been a crossover, and I think you guys were probably the gateway.
Yeah, I hope so. That'd be cool. Yeah.
Okay, so C. Myers 1980 said, I consider this movie to be one of the best horror films of the decade and one of the greatest found footage films of all time. Did you give the villains the costumes? If so, why did you choose the style that you did? I assume he's referring to Blue Skeleton.
We did, yes. We designed the masks. The masks were all specially made for the movie. There was... The goal with that was kind of the same with the name of the haunt and the haunters, calling it the Blue Skeleton, something generic that you may have seen before. That's the same way if you saw these guys walking around with those skull masks in a Halloween environment, you don't really perk up. You wanted them to be able to blend in with everybody. So that was the idea, is that they could be in each scene. And in fact, in Houses 2, they're in almost every scene. You can pick them out in different places. Porcelain and some of the Blue Skeleton, they're everywhere throughout almost every single major scene in Houses 2. It's almost like a Where's Waldo. But that idea of them blending into the background was important because I wanted you to hopefully feel like they're always watching. And a mask like that is somewhat inconspicuous in the Halloween fair.
Yeah, it's funny because it's kind of such a, and I don't mean it in a bad way, but like a generic kind of mask. It does exactly that. It blends in until you realize, and then it becomes like kind of unsettling in a way because this keeps popping up, and you're kind of like, what? I don't really know what's going on here.
We always wanted to build up to when you eventually see the Blue Skeleton man, the leader, also knowing that, okay, there's this hierarchy here. Who's that guy that's in charge of all of them? So we figured with the kind of drab white skulls for everybody, even though they're called the Blue Skeleton, would hopefully perk up, your anticipation for, okay, well, where's the Blue Skeleton then? So that was kind of a little bit of the idea behind him. And
he also asked if you could explain in your own words, what exactly is Blue Skeleton?
The most extreme haunted house in the world. And by that doesn't mean that it's McCamey or Universal Horror Nights. It means we psychologically will be able to scare you by research, by stalking, by any means necessary. They are the biggest, the baddest, and have the longest reach of any haunted house on planet Earth.
Yeah, and I think that's something, and it's kind of odd because there's, you kind of alluded to it earlier, like where there was and there still is, like this strange cult kind of following for the Blue Skeleton. And it always kind of crops up, and in all the threads I see online and in forums, it kind of crops up as if it's actually come to life in a way.
Sure.
And guys kind of have continued on all these theories and conspiracies about, oh no, well, this is actually something that's, this is real. You're being told it's part of the movie, but I've got a friend who actually
went.
Who knows, or he went, or something like that, which I think is a really unique idea.
Yeah, I love that, and that's why I to your question before about our own haunted house, I do think it would be really, really fun to do. The reason we didn't jump into it right away is because the Blue Skeleton, the idea, their mission statement, I think would be, it's almost personalized or individualized for each person to walk through. And so that would take a lot of time and money and to scare each person psychologically, you would need to do a lot of background work, right? Which I think is possible, but then you're dealing with things like one-offs, like you're only allowing 5 people to come in a night, that kind of thing. So there would be a lot of planning to do it. I do think that there's a version of it if we spend a lot of time figuring that out, which one day hopefully we can. But yeah, I think it would be a lot of fun to explore. But then I think there's also the expectations would be pretty high that it just can't be jump scares and different scenes as you walk through. That's not going to cut it.
Yeah, because somebody had suggested, like, oh, how come this hasn't appeared at, Knott's or Universal? And it's kind of like, yeah, but it's like that thing. I don't know if you've ever been to some of those houses and maybe they take an IP that doesn't necessarily fit with that and they just put in, boo doors and stuff like that. And I feel like that exactly what you're saying, if it's not done kind of in line with the values of the movie, it kind of kills it would be cool, but I don't think it would be as effective as if you guys really sat down and fleshed out the idea.
Right. You'd hope that the creators of the Blue Skeleton would never, quote unquote, sell out to the mainstream, like that's not their point. Mm-hmm. And so you would keep it this off the beaten path, back alley type of haunted house, because that's what it ultimately is.
Okay, so the real Newman says, this is my favorite found footage film of all time. I'm definitely curious if they decided to make all the sequels before filming the original documentary. I had hoped for the same level of greatness for the sequel, but I'm still unsure how much I like it. I will say, though, that the ending of part 2 is enough to save the entire movie. So basically his question is, let's see. Yeah, so again, it's another one of those questions, like when you went in and filmed the first part 0, did you have the entire franchise or whatever blocked out?
We had it mapped out, not as fleshed out as we do now, because I think that you have to pivot and adapt to what things worked, what didn't, throughout the journey. I think that's the only way to make a successful franchise or series. Mm-hmm. And then to his question about 2, it's funny because, trying to pull the trick on somebody twice is tough. But then there's also, could we have recast and it could have just been a different group? Yeah, but then those start to feel like those one-off like DVD sequels where you didn't have a plan, you're going to just rehash it with a new cast. It felt like the idea of the Blue Skeleton not being able to finish what they started important. And I do think that I personally think there's a lot of magic with Brandy. I think she's a really great actress, and she's very disarming. She was so integral in talking to these people. And she's a trooper. That's for sure. Being with us for the past 10 years in that RV, doing what we've done, she's been awesome. And I didn't want her to go away. I think that she's important to this series, like any Scream Queen is. And so I think that was really important. And I think her getting us back in some way in part 2 justifies a lot of the stuff. I mean, it's funny how many people after seeing 2, I get so much like flack for like being an asshole or being a bad person, as if that's my character, if that's me in real life. Like, and I hope it's a testament to how real people feel all these stories are to them. So I'll take that heat if they want to, but that doesn't mean just because my name is Bobby that I'm the same person, same with Zach and Mikey and everybody else. But I do take that as a compliment that people think it's real enough to think I'm an asshole.
Yeah, and I had actually seen that complaint quite a bit online, that a lot of people seem to feel like after they finished the second movie, I'd seen one comment and the guy said, he was like, I actually can't rewatch the second movie now knowing that all the characters are assholes and they're all out to... I was like, the movie has done exactly what it intended to do then. I don't think he meant it in a bad way, but I think he was kind of alluding to the fact that he became so engrossed in the story and the characters that...
Well, I wonder, I always debate this, it doesn't do you much good to be a Monday morning quarterback about these things, but it's it's interesting because we had debated that when Zach and I and two go to visit her at her house, Brandy, that her mom is sick and she needs money for medical bills and stuff. And that's kind of this catalyst of why we did what we did. It just felt, you've seen that before. It felt heavy handed. It just didn't feel like this movie. And maybe it was a mistake. Maybe that would be a little more of a driving force, make us less of pricks for doing it. But, I think that we've earned, especially through the first one, that Brandy's like our sister. I mean, we've always been very protective of her. It's almost like it's playing a prank. Right. So I don't know why it's categorized as so bad, but, the idea of that we, the money, my even character says the money was for you. Like, we did this for you, but it was the only way to do it. And in the long run, we all get double crossed. And so it's interesting. But if you can't tap into people's, nerves and feelings, then the movies become blah. So even with some disdain or hate, even for our characters or whatever, it evokes emotion. And I think that's a filmmaker's job. So for better or worse, if we touch those nerves, good.
Yeah, and I guess being such a fan of the movies myself, maybe, and being so into the haunt community, I feel like this movie, you don't ever want to be I think you want people to be on either side of the fence, whether they think that all of the characters are assholes or they love it or they hate it or whatever. You don't ever want to be in that middle ground where you just another movie or another idea or whatever. And I think that's why, it's been, when did number 1 release?
14.
Yeah, 2014. So it's been 6 years, and this still, we're still talking about this. And even online in a lot of forums on Reddit and stuff, it still crops up all the time. So
that's our biggest surprise, I think, that we've really enjoyed is the resurgence. Being part of everyone's Halloween rotation has been the utmost compliment you can give at least a horror filmmaker, because it's the new people are discovering it every year, which is awesome. Because if it was another movie and it wasn't seasonal, it would just die off.
Yeah, 100%. And it's I've pulled these movies out similar to kind of what you've said about One Cut of the Dead, where I've made my friends maybe who aren't horror fans or they wonder why I go to Orlando every year, why I've been to LA to do this or that and go to these haunts, in September and October every year. And then I showed them and they're like, this is the shit you want? I was like, yep, this is exactly it. But it was always anyone I've shown a movie to it's never really been negative. They've been like, oh, I hated it, but it just made me uncomfortable. That's why I don't, it's not a bad movie. I just don't like watching it because it makes me really uncomfortable.
That's good. I say mission accomplished.
Yeah. And it succeeds as well. I think in, found footage has always been one of my kind of favorite subgenres. And a lot of times I watch the movies, but you don't really feel like you're there or you're part of the story. And I feel like these really kind of draw you into the characters and the dynamic. And like I said before, you kind of don't even realize that you're watching a movie.
Right. And it's funny you bring it up because the thing that we sometimes hear about people that are, let's call them naysayers. They're like, and then they, why is that guy, Jeff, reading a poem? It has nothing to do with the plot. That was another fight for me as well, because that seems like the obvious fat to cut, but I think it's not about that you understand the joke. It's that we as characters or as this group have inside jokes. So to me, that establishes our background. That establishes how close we are. And if I don't leave some of that fat on there, I think that's the mistake a lot of movies, found footage especially, do. They cut the fat. The characters become cardboard, and you're pretty sure that these people didn't meet till the morning this movie started. Yeah. And that doesn't help. That does not serve your journey well at all if these people don't have chemistry. And when you're getting actors from all over, you don't know what you have. You're not positive if they're going to have chemistry or not. You hope they do. But that's why we kind of tackled it in reverse and said, okay, we're going to use people we actually are close with, people that have acting backgrounds, but most importantly are friends, and we know the chemistry is real. Because if that's not there, you're never, ever buying what we're serving you, ever. And so if you can get rid of the cardboard cutout trope that found footage is so guilty of, then you're off to a huge start ahead of most of them.
Yeah, and so with you guys doing the original Part Zero, as you call it, in that time between that and then things kind of taking off and deciding that, okay, we're going to reshoot this whole thing, was there ever a point where anybody suggested it not being you guys?
There were whispers of they were going to hold, for lack of a better term, like CW recast at first.
Okay.
So they're just going to take guys off CW, WB shows, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that just would have lost the magic as well. Maybe it'd be a bigger movie, but I don't know if it would have worked the same way, So there was a brief discussion of that, but we didn't want to do that. It has nothing to do. Personally, I would have never even put myself in the movie if I didn't need to direct at the same time of acting, if that makes any sense. I needed to be able to guide them on some of the story points we wanted to do without it being so obvious and just in a line reading. Because we did have to make audibles as we went, because people would say things that blew our mind. I always kind of talk about, I would touch Brandy on 4 different parts of her back to ask different questions if I was behind her, like, let's lead them this way, this way, this way. And I started to have to just not do that. It didn't matter, because some of the answers we'd get, like when one of the haunt owners said he's short of gang raping people to scare them, I could have, if I wrote that in the script, people would say that's the stupidest, most outlandish line ever. Nobody would ever say that. Yeah. And then it happened in real life. So we were having to make calls as we went. And I also don't know how possible that would be without people with a certain chemistry and comfortability with each other. I think that's a word that's probably a big part of this, is being comfortable with each other in these moments, making sure you felt protected. I mean, Brandy knew that there isn't a planet I'd let something happen to her. Like, even the bathroom scene where she's somewhat accosted. I mean, I was standing right there just to, I didn't, necessarily love filming a scene like that. It was uncomfortable. And so I just wanted to make sure she was safe, but she's a trooper, and, all is good. So, I mean, that's just my take on all that, is that it needs to be as real as possible, and you need to start that way. Otherwise it's pretty tough to pull off, even with the best actors.
Yeah. Like even just when you bring up that bathroom scene, like I found that like super hard to watch. I don't know. It didn't feel like a scene from a horror movie or a horror film. It felt like something that, could actually happen and made sense in a way. And then just how the characters deal with it right afterwards when you guys come back in. It just felt so raw, like it actually happened in a way. And it's kind of funny to hear you say that, like, you were right there as that was going on, because while it's happening in real time, it seems like, oh yeah, I'm just watching this documentary style movie that these people shot, and they got caught up in some bad shit.
I think people forget that when they're making found footage, because you probably take 2 approaches, and I think a lot of people, the mistake they make is, I'm making a movie, and there's certain things in the movie world, when we're watching a movie, we know the rules you're supposed to follow, right? Whether it's 3-act structure to beats, to all the above. If I take you away from that formula that you've grown so accustomed to, then it's unsettling. I mean, it can backfire on you, right? To some people that think it's slow and not enough's happening. But I just needed to get you out of your movie wheelhouse, so you kind of fall for the story we're telling in real time, because real life isn't a 3-act structure. real life doesn't have all these perfect lines, and real life still has fat on it. And so that's just kind of the tough thing when you're trying to convince people that people will stay along for the ride, but they're like, no, we need to cut it down. It needs to be 91 minutes as opposed to 96. Sometimes it's arbitrary rules that make so many of these movies vanilla and forgettable.
Yeah, that kind of ties into the next question I have here. It comes from UG Burner. It says, God, I remember this movie making me extremely uncomfortable to the point where I could barely watch. But in a way, I really like that feeling. What feeling did you want to make the viewer feel throughout?
Snuff is the wrong word. But I did want you to feel that you may be watching something voyeuristic, illicit. I don't know exactly what it is, because I don't think you were ever able to pull off a full snuff feel, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we're not making a Serbian film, where I just want you to feel like you were along the ride and it went real wrong, and you're kind of uncomfortable watching it, knowing like, are you supposed to be watching this? Are you supposed to know like what exactly is going on? I always thought the idea that I loved, there's a deleted scene it's a deleted ending or an alt ending for The Ring. Mm-hmm. And you follow somebody walking up to Blockbuster, and they're returning that videotape to Blockbuster. Okay. And they shot it. I think you can watch it on one of the DVDs. It's really cool. It probably didn't fit the tone of the film. But that idea has always stuck to me, that was the smartest thing they could do to make you feel like, oh, is this VHS out in the world? And nobody would even know. Like, they go rent Roadhouse and they put it in, not even thinking, looking at it, and now they've got 7 days to live. Like, that idea is so cool to me. And I wanted to kind of give a little bit of that feel of every time you walk through a haunt, come the Halloween season, if you go off on your little adventures, this could happen to you, was the idea that we hoped for.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, it's kind of succeeded in that really across the board. That seems to be the general feel. Even for the people who, as you said before, who maybe are a little bit upset with the slow burn, or maybe the payoff, they wanted something different or whatever. I still think they can appreciate if you sit back and look at it done exactly what it set out to do. Okay, so I have another question here from Gamer Jess. She says, do you regret what people feel about the sequel or what it did to the original?
Yeah, so you do see that people are like, oh, it undid part one. Mm-hmm. Right? And so that's another thing that's funny, is because I've seen people too, like, I've never, the negative like headlines of it is like, I've never seen a movie destroy the original, right? Or something like that. And I also take that as a compliment. If that's never been done before, cool. Mm-hmm. Because I showed you behind the curtain, you destroyed part one. I was like, no, it's still a big, long story. So are you not supposed to go watch Nolan's The Prestige because Christian Bale's trick? Right? Like, yeah. That to me, it's still a ride. Now, in some ways, I want to rewatch one to see what little things we maybe tipped you off of, or along those lines. There's an eye look that I give. We always joke is the Jim Halpert, but I do it twice in part one, looking at the camera, but I'm looking at Zach, and I'm basically like going like, is this gone too far? Like, are we, this look that we have together, and I'm looking at camera. But there's just little things like that you can go back and look, because ultimately it's one big long story, just because you may know the twist. And I don't think it completely undone. It might undo the danger for you, mm-hmm. but then look at it a different way, because it already worked for you. If you're that mad about it, then it worked for you in part one, right? Like, it scared you. Cool. Now you get to look at it a different way, as a design trick. Try to watch it that way. So no, I don't ever, the easy answer is like, okay, so I could have just made 8 sequels, all doing different, taking a different group, cutting them up. Sure. There's a world for that. There's a world you could do it. It's just, we like to try to reinvent the wheel, not necessarily, but just give you something you hadn't seen. And that's why I go back to Saw or One Cut of the Dead, or I want things that make an impression on me that last, not ones I can reference 3 other movies that are exactly like it.
Yeah, because it kind of ties into, I can't remember the exact tagline, but wasn't there a tagline for the second one? It wasn't, what was it? It wasn't the ending.
Oh, it was an intermission.
Yeah. And that, like, I mean, that seems like a simple, maybe just a generic tagline or whatever. That explains it exactly. Like, that's not the end of the story. So
sure.
That's the part that, yes, it's the end of the first movie or whatever, but we're continuing on with the story, so you can't discredit. If somehow we got that information and we just had one movie and then maybe you got that information afterwards, you could say, oh, well, that you've undone everything from the first movie and now you're not elaborating on what's going on, but we're in a continuing storyline. So
yeah, I've always debated. I remember talking to the studio about it. I said at one point I'd love to do, because we live in a streaming world where you're not worried about prints and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. I'd love to release a long version of 1 and 2 combined together, because they're seamless right now. But you'd have to press play right away. I'd love to just have a 3-hour cut that you have it all together and then see how people perceive it that way, because it is an intermission. It is a stopping point. You can still be afraid halfway through, and then we continue on with the story. I'd love to see how that works out. Yeah. Right. Especially for somebody who's never seen either. Mm-hmm. That would be really interesting to me to kind of see how they feel.
That's actually a really good idea. I was kind of surprised that you guys hadn't done that at some point.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think I remember them saying that we had to wait a couple years, and like I get all that. Where, I mean, how many? Not that in any way I'm comparing it, but Ridley Scott has 5 different versions of Blade Runner. I think I have.
Yeah.
And so it's things like that where, look, it's cool that we can now a director's cut or alt version is a lot simpler now in a streaming world than it was before, of manufacturing a DVD for it, or, so maybe we'll get some more alt versions. I mean, I'm personally excited for Stallone's cut of Rocky IV after 35 years. Just like, I don't even know what that is, but I'm in.
Yeah. I guess you just got to give it the time.
Yep.
Okay. So got another question here from Gamer Jess. She says, I really like both movies. I haven't seen the original version of the first, though. I have 2 questions. Number 1, was it easier or better remaking your own movie with the same cast, or did you prefer the process the first time around?
It's kind of like a big rehearsal. The best part about all of it is the education that was given from making a movie independently and then making a movie with a big studio. You got to see, for better or worse, the fat that they left on, that, when coming to making part 2, we had these 2 different plates to look at and go, okay, well, we're going to use this from our indie minds of it, and here's from our studio minds, and kind of mesh them together. So it was a lesson that no film school could have ever taught, to basically make the same movie 2 different ways. Mm-hmm. And I'll always feel very grateful that we got to do it that way, because it was eye-opening. And I think for everybody, chemistry wise, I think it's very helpful, because you were able to kind of we did this run through. We're all still really good friends, and everybody was really comfortable by that time in front of the camera. So on that side, it was good. But yeah, it's one of those rare cases. I always, when I get asked that question, I always think about, I think it was Penelope Cruz played her same role in the Spanish version of Eyes Wide Shut, or not Vanilla Sky, or Open Your Eyes in Spanish, and then Vanilla Sky, which is really cool because you can see how maybe that goes stale, or maybe you get to fix all the things you wish you would have done. I don't know, but it's interesting, and I don't think there's a lot of examples of that.
And like personally, I think it worked out because a lot of people only find out about your Part Zero, like probably after watching both movies. Sure. Which says a lot then, because it doesn't. Sometimes maybe you think, oh well, you know, maybe you captured the gold the first time, and then you're just kind of rehashing it. It might, even though you guys have these close relationships, it might feel forced, or you might feel like now you're really acting, and you've really got to act out, you know, how scared you are or whatever is going on, and it doesn't give off that vibe at all, which I think is great.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I'm glad.
She also asked, again, the same question, and a lot of people message me this, and I know we all kind of know what the answer is anyway, but what is happening with the sequels? Is there any information we can get? I'm sure I read somewhere that Bobby has 3 to 4 movies planned out in total. I've heard online that there's talks of international haunts, etc.
Yeah, it's hard because I'd love to tease more of it. The problem is I feel like everything, because of COVID, got pushed another year. Yeah. We were supposed to start shooting Wicked Tale in June. We ended up shooting this other movie, Isolation, through lockdown. So everything's kind of pushed back. Mm-hmm. So normally I would love to like be teasing something right now. But I think until we get that movie out of the way next year, we're going to have to wait a little bit longer for Part 3. Okay,
cool. So yeah, the kind of last thing I guess I wanted to touch on was, so was it after Part 2 that you and Zach wrote the book?
Oh, the children's book?
Yeah.
We actually wrote it in between 1 and 2, but didn't finish it all up because we worked with a painter, David Grizzle, for a while on getting everything right. But I think that was kind of that mix in between with, having a baby, being in this macabre world for, 6 years at the time. It was just kind of this break, I guess. And we always want to do an animated movie, but that's not our wheelhouse. Hopefully one day, could explore that. But, it was just kind of an interesting process to kind of give some levity and light to all the dark that we're kind of involved in. But yeah, it was just an interesting ride because I'd read a bunch of books to my daughter at the time, and I was just shocked how bad many of them were, published by huge publishers. And I just thought they just lacked any kind of effort to me. And we kind of always wanted to tell this story, but nobody wants to hear from a bunch of horror guys about a kid's, but hopefully if you're fans of kind of the stories we tell, this is still, even though it's for children, hopefully it's something that you hadn't seen. We'd never seen an origin narwhal story. And to me, growing up, that was really cool. Animal that we could never see in an aquarium. They'd break the glass. And so a lot of people didn't know about it. And I even had to acquire a picture from National Geographic to incorporate in the end of the book, because we were shocked that 50% of the people thought narwhals were mythical creatures, which I thought was strange. So we enjoyed that. It was a nice break. But of course I've gotten from so many people, they're like, oh, cool. So like the narwhal and Pails the fisherman. And I was like, just because we do horror, I'm not going that route. No, it's a nice, wholesome story. With some characters that, we've always liked kind of the cryptozoology side of storytelling. So we try to incorporate all the characters and stuff like that.
Yeah, because it seems like in a way, kind of a strange switch without knowing that little bit of backstory to go from that to that. And it was writing books and stuff. Is that something that you're maybe interested in continuing, or would you ever delve into... I got a couple of questions about, like, would you ever write a horror book or a horror story, or do you have anything like that, in your wheelhouse that you're looking to get out there?
Well, yeah, it's a good question, because what's nice about the book side of things, whether it's horror or fantasy or whatever, is you're just not restricted to budget. And sometimes when we have to write things, even if you have this grand idea, you got to ground it a little bit on what's possible, because it's not going to be a $75 million movie. And so I don't like that ceiling sometimes to screenwriting. So with a book, the sky's the limit, and that's kind of nice. So it is something, it's a very long process, to do. What we hope to do is our versions of lately is we've got two really, we think big horror ideas that we've kind of been fleshing out. And I think it serves us best to make those in screenplay form, because that is something that we can actually execute well. Because if we took the long route and made the 300-page book, then that has to catch on. Then somebody would come in and then ask to adapt it. It's just a really long process that hopefully we can skip that step. That's not ruling out books, but I just think that that's our time best served is making what we would have done in book form in feature form, because that's where it ultimately ends up anyway. But I go back. I do love the freedom and the idea of a book with no restrictions. Yeah,
because somewhere, I can't remember where exactly I read, because there's so many crazy conspiracies and like these weird online urban legends now about the two movies and about Blue Skeleton and everything that goes on with that a lot of people were like, oh, I'd love a backstory book on Blue Skeleton, or some weird kind of prequel thing.
Sure, we have discussed that, but more in film form. We and I love that. The fact that exists makes me feel really good, because I love the idea of that from a prequel standpoint, what makes somebody do what they do? How did it start? So it's just a very interesting way to do it. And sure, I'd love to see more of that as well. And, I think if fans want it and people are loud enough, things like that happen, because sometimes it's not just up to the filmmakers. There's a lot of the money guys that have to be convinced. And, that's a part of it that I would love to take out of the whole movie side of it, the movie business. But unfortunately it's a necessity. And sometimes you have to wear so many hats. You don't want to spread yourself thin on the creative side of it. So it would be nice one day to just fully be able to talk or concentrate on the creative. So maybe we'll get to that place, and then, people just start trusting a lot better. But a lot of these things happen when fans speak up.
Okay. So moving off that then altogether. So what have you got in the pipeline? What's coming next? There's a couple of things. I think A Wicked Tale I had seen some rumblings about online.
Yeah. So first off, we finished Isolation, which that was cool because we, at the time, Wicked Tale just kind of had been shut down, like everybody's project had been shut down with the COVID restrictions. And this has come about March of this year. So we tried to figure out what we were going to do. So we just kind of spent some time writing, and I got a call from a producer out of New York who I was recommended to. They wanted 9 horror directors from around the world to make this anthology, but yet all set in one quarantined world. But the catch is that it's basically the camera you have in your house, no crew. How creative can you get? And so I'm very proud of being part of that, because it was quite an undertaking. And I at first kind of turned it down because I'm not a DP. I don't have the $100,000 camera at home. I didn't want it to look bad. I thought I could pull off the story. And then it was a time also with family, having small little ones. If I'm going to do that, that's another 2 months that's just kind of taken away from them. And then we kind of got to the idea working backwards of incorporating the family in it, and working on it together as a project through the lockdown. And when I took that attitude, it was so much better, and it was such a learning experience, I think, for them. And I'm very, very proud of the performance that they pulled off. And it ended up being this weird kind of like film school in a time where they couldn't even really go to school. And so it's just an interesting look, and maybe it even ends up being some sort of time capsule from around the world, because there's directors from Germany and London and several places in the States. And so you're getting to see this one moment in time around the world that's, we're not talking zombies here, but we're talking hyper real, but still grounded in what's happening in your neighborhood. And so that'll be really interesting. And there's hopefully some more release news about that soon.
And as regards then A Wicked Tale, that's kind of just been put on.
Yeah, so it's a grounded Grimm's Brothers universe that we've created, and we're really excited, especially working with the Walking Dead guys. It's been a ride, and it's just heartbreaking to get so close and greenlit and getting ready to start when everything was put on hold. So, you try to not sit on your hands. Hopefully, I think we've made some script even improvements to that where we thought we were done, and time maybe was a blessing to hone it in a little bit more when we didn't think we had that time. So hopefully that gets all back on track in the spring when some of these restrictions get lifted. But we're really excited for that. And we kind of designed 3 films for that, God willing.
Cool. So that's kind of, I guess, the silver lining in a way. We can expect more than just, obviously, probably a lot of people that are going to listen to this wanted to hear you say, Houses October Built 3 is whatever. It's coming out next year. We've been secretly filming. But yeah, it's cool to see that you guys kind of are starting to move out. Like, is that hard for you to be involved in 2 movies like The Houses October Built, and then write a kid's book, and then go and do this thing, and all these kind of different projects? Is that difficult to kind of keep changing hats?
No, to be honest, changing hats is it's a little more, I guess, invigorating in a way, because you don't get stuck in the same world. Mm-hmm. So I like it. Like I used to always say, and it's not what your agent wants to hear, your manager, but I want to always hit the cycle. I would love on my tombstone to have at least had some form of impact in every genre. That mm-hmm. would excite me. I'm most interested in telling stories that you hopefully haven't thought about. And that doesn't mean that it can't be a rom-com to horror. That I enjoy. Most people want it to tell you to stay in your wheelhouse, which is fine. You can, to become an expert, you need, your 10,000 hours. That's fine. But if you keep recycling the same kind of stuff without, who knows what doing some kind of comedy would give you ideas into branching off into something new in horror. I think walking in other people's shoes is the smartest way to be good at anything and in any occupation. So that's the goal. It's not as much of a through line as most people, kind of attack their careers, because it is easier to stay into what you're known for. A lot of people just want to be able to, if they can put your name on the poster that, said the last movie you did was a hit, that's all anybody's kind of concerned with, which I get from a business side. I 100% understand that. But you just kind of do your best to spread out there and tell stories for all walks of life. I think that's a fun way to at least attack it. And it does make me feel when I sit down at a keyboard to go, okay, let's start tackling this whole new world. That feels better sometimes than rehashing the same.
Yeah. That makes sense. And that kind of ties into my second last question, because I know I've had you for quite a long time now. So what advice would you give to somebody, doesn't even necessarily have to be a filmmaker, but somebody looking to follow their dreams, maybe that are seen as unconventional? Like I would say that your career and the path you're headed on is kind of seen like winning the lottery for a lot of people. It's like those 1 in a million lifestyles. While it may not always be easy or whatever, and I'm sure there's a lot of pitfalls that you deal with that we would never know about. But what kind of advice would you give to somebody who is maybe looking to follow something that's not maybe not your clear-cut career, you know, a doctor or a lawyer or whatever.
Sure. I think my advice in all forms is, you know, put pen to paper or something doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. Maybe to your, like, it might even be a better example to bring up the children's book is that we've always had that idea. Doesn't matter. You can have the greatest idea in the world. And I think that to a fault, I used to always play things so close to the chest, thinking that you had a great twist or a great idea. And it's hard because there are people in this world that will steal your idea and take your idea. And it's very hard to be trusting, especially in Hollywood. But I did realize after some time that if you don't show some of those cards, it'll never happen. You know, and so you can have this idea, whether it be about a narwhal or haunted houses. But if you don't put pen to paper, if something is not tangible, it doesn't exist. This isn't a formula for cold fusion. Mm-hmm. You're not sitting on something that somebody has to have, right? Yeah. You're going to have to show them that you can execute it or show them this idea works. And sometimes that takes running your credit card. Sometimes that takes you knocking on people's door because no one's coming knocking. There's too much out there. There's too much job security that people just want to do the same old thing over and over. That way no one gets fired for that, you know? Yeah. So my advice to anybody listening, and no matter what you want to do, is make it real. You know, whatever idea that is in any form that is. Maybe it's blueprints if you're an architect. Maybe it's, you know, writing a novel, get the treatment done at least. You know, start making it happen that doesn't, you know, you don't have to mortgage your home, you know, try to do things that doesn't cost you a lot of money, but you do have to put in the work. And sometimes, you know, a lot of those nights are till 4 a.m. But if you don't do that, nobody's ever going to realize it. No one's ever going to see it. I mean, take it from somebody who nobody in the town would listen to because I wasn't kind of curbing it to what they needed with ghosts and paranormal, just because and it's not completely their fault, but they just didn't understand what the haunt community was, what haunted houses were. And we had to kind of put it all out there to show them this is a real phenomenon. This is a real thing that people love. And just because you don't know about it doesn't mean that it's not worthy of an audience. And so, you know, we did our best to kind of execute it, even in its rawest form. But it's still there and it still tells a story, even if it doesn't look as pretty as a lot of the different Hollywood movies.
Yeah. And just to touch on it a small bit, I feel like as well, maybe not as much now, but a lot of people use the excuse maybe I'm not in the States, or I'm not in Hollywood, or I'm not here, I'm not there. Do you think there's something to that, or it boils down to the hard work and the grit is the difference between?
It's both. I will say though, with Corona, we've all realized that I don't think half the people are going back to offices anymore, no matter what you do for a living. Mm-hmm. That through the Zoom world, things can exist. You don't have to be in the States. You don't have to be in Hollywood. But to be devil's advocate to that as well is I do think you have to have relationships because you at one point you're going to have somebody trust you. And so that is why I think Los Angeles is important in your early part of your career. And the other part, which has nothing to do with that as much as it does the Zoom situation, is I've been on these pitches through these last 9 months and the energy is not there. And I used to think or felt I could be really good in a room because I'm a pretty passionate guy. Mm-hmm. And if I believe in it, you're going to feel it. Even if you know what I mean? I'm going to hopefully ooze that. And over Zoom, it doesn't feel that way. It's strangely sterile. And there's not a whole lot we can do about that until, you know, vaccines out there and everybody's taken care of, until we're shaking hands again. Mm-hmm. But no, I don't fully think you need to be. I think it's helpful to have relationships, but no, you don't need to be there the same way you used to. And, you know, if you have an idea, you know, screenplays can be written from the moon, you know, but so put pen to paper, get it going. And even movies now, I mean, the fact that movies exist made completely from iPhones is baffling, but it's true.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah. And so you just remember that I've always tried to be a perfectionist about things, but you can't be fully, because you don't have the budget or the money to compete with some of these big ones that people kind of hold that kind of hold you as the comparative film. You can't do that. Just tell your story the best way you can, and maybe it'll be remade with more money, right? Like, and that's kind of what we did. And that doesn't mean there's a through path for everybody. That way, I think everyone's path, especially in film, is so different than the people flanking them. And neither one is wrong or right. It's just the way it kind of played out. But almost none of these stories take place without somebody putting in the work and getting it out there. And that's kind of the only way to make any of these dreams come true, because the idea of somebody finding you in an arcade like Eddie Furlong in Terminator 2, like that's your $1 billion to 1. And that just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, I think it's kind of become a culture as well to sit in that kind of purgatory or whatever, to kind of sit there and always about to be doing something, or always about to write that script, or launch that podcast, or write that book, or make that movie, or whatever. It's like people have kind of gotten used to sitting in that gray area. But yeah, I do think, things like this whole COVID thing has changed the dynamic to a degree. I mean, even as we spoke about earlier, those guys who made the movie on Shudder, Host, I mean, they just worked with what they had, really. It's not a super pretty movie. It's made through Zoom, essentially. But like you said, you work with what you've got, and maybe it'll be remade with more money, or maybe you'll get a different job out of it, or whatever. But it's just doing it, I guess, is the key.
Yeah, there's steps, right? I mean, it's easier. People don't like to visualize because it takes time. It takes 2 hours to read a screenplay. They'd rather watch a short film they think that could be a feature. Like, you just have to put it on a silver platter the best way you can. And to make somebody else believe in you, or at least believe in the project. And it doesn't help to sit on your hands, and nobody has the excuses of this year of not having enough time, because we all had extra time, whether we wanted it or not. It's just, how did you use it?
Yeah. Well, last question of the day. I really appreciate your time as well. I know we've spoken for quite a while now. So my last question to everybody is, what is your favorite horror movie of all time? Or if you could only watch one horror movie for the rest of your life, what would you pick and why?
I think for rewatchability, I just love the original Scream. And sometimes, these answers depends on what age you were when you first saw it. But there was just something about it that it's almost like it was this all-star movie of touching on all the horror movies I grew up as a kid, and it was just this nice mix. So I think I can always put that on, and it's funny. I showed my dad it for the first time. I don't know how, he'd never seen it at Thanksgiving. And that opening scene is so amazing. And one of the longest opening scenes I can think of as well. And it just plays gangbusters every single time. And that ruse that, that bait and switch they had with her on the Barrymore on the cover of the poster, and then dying in the opening scene, is just brilliant. And so I'd always go back to that. I love what they did with that. It was ahead of its time.
Yeah, Craven was really ahead of his time with a lot of that stuff, and even
sure, like
you said before, with New Nightmare. While I understand, like, a lot of people had problems with different things in that movie, he was able to switch. Like, how many movies were they in when New Nightmare came out?
I want to say New Nightmare is 7.
And like, for him to be able to completely switch that is crazy, and it's a testament to how good he was of a filmmaker.
Absolutely. And I hate it when people get, slammed for taking a big swing.
Yeah.
It's like Shyamalan sometimes gets that, and I will watch any movie he does till the end of time, because there's nobody that swings harder than he does. No one. And even when he's wrong, he falls on his face and it's hard. And when he's right, it's amazing. So that just comes with not being afraid to make a mistake or be wrong. You know, Brett Favre always talks about, if you haven't thrown a bunch of interceptions all year, then you haven't been trying. And what he means by that is like, you're just afraid to throw it too close to try to get it into tight situations. Do that, you know, on the field. He's saying you're not trying hard enough. And I understand that analogy is that if you're not willing to fly close to the sun, you're never going to have anything that people remember. You're just going to be safe.
Yeah.
But you're going to mess up. You know, you're going to have things that don't work. But you could have never known until you tried, and maybe it turns into something else. So that would be, you know, my advice is just swing big when you can and try to make an impression and try to be the first to do something. That never hurts.
Yeah, I guess because no matter which way it goes, you'll never know what the alternative was. So why not just go for it and let the cards fall where they may?
Absolutely. I wanted to tell you too, I love the look of your account is always so fun to see the old movie ads.
It's becoming harder and harder to find.
I'm sure.
To find those.
But it's so nice because it does bring back a memory. And then it also, some of them are so much older I've never seen in my life.
Yeah, me too. Like really obscure, like weird.
Yeah.
I actually originally got the idea from, I can't remember the guy's name off the top of my head. I want to say he was the editor for Fangoria, maybe. He has a series of books out called Ad Nauseam, and it's hardback books that have all movie posters for horror and sci-fi movies from the 80s, the 90s, 2000s, and like a little piece about them. And that's kind of where I got the idea. I got those books and I was like, this is a cool idea. I don't see anybody post these online just as like a quick scroll. And
no, it's such a cool throwback. I mean, I miss the days. It's so crazy how you used to have to look at that ad and then find out what time the movie started.
Yeah. I only recently found a TV guide from over here, and like I had forgotten that people would, when I opened it, there was like certain programs circled, and I'm like, wow, that was like, I forgot that we had to do that.
Absolutely.
You would like mark out whatever movie on whatever day, and you would have like the 7 days of the TV guide.
I watched, it was weird, an old episode of Cheers was on the other day, and the whole bar, Sam, closes early because the Magnificent Seven is playing that night and they all wanted to watch it. I'm like, that's so bizarre.
Yeah, it's so weird.
They altered their life because something was coming on that they couldn't pause or record at the time.
Yeah, and I even found old videotapes that I had attempted to. I remember when we first got a player, I used to attempt to try and record and like cut together my own movie. So if Alien was playing, for example, I would try and record it from the start and then stop it during the commercial and then put it back on. Yeah, and it was like cutting really weird. I found like tapes 2-3 weeks ago and I was like, wow, that's so bizarre. It seems like a million years ago.
My mom did that actually with movies that I really wanted to see, but I was too young, like RoboCop. She would cut out like when they blast them in the beginning and some of the sex scenes. So they would try to make this edited version because I was so much younger but wanted so badly to see it. Mm-hmm. She would do the stop and start, which is just such an amazing effort as a mom at the time.
Yeah, I actually had a similar experience with RoboCop, and I had never seen I still probably seen it when I was too young anyway, but I had never seen the scene where they have him on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like all blown apart and stuff. And I remember seeing that for the first time. And like that freaked me the fuck out.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why, but I just have this really vivid memory of seeing that scene and like feeling really weird and uncomfortable about it.
You've probably never seen somebody so close to death that you're like, why is he even alive? But you could be because it was bothersome.
Yeah, and like his face and everything used to just like haunt me. I remember at night, every time I closed my eyes, I could see his like fucking weird half bald head.
Uh-huh.
Well, anyway, man, I appreciate your time. Where can everybody follow you or check up on stuff?
So on Instagram they can follow me. My personal account is Houses October Built, and then on Twitter I'm Bobby Rowe 1. I think. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So just keep an eye on basically either of those things. So follow them on either of those. The links will be.
Yeah, if you want more Houses news, you can just follow us on Facebook. It's just under the Houses October Built on Facebook, and try to update any.
Is that the best place strictly for Houses fans?
Yeah. Yep. On Facebook. And so, when we're doing Fright Rags just did a bunch of new shirts and stuff like that. So I try to make sure everybody's kind of updated if any stuff like that happens.
Okay, cool. Well, the links will be down below in all the descriptions, anywhere that you get podcasts and on YouTube and stuff as well. So
sounds good. Well, I appreciate the time.
You too, man. Thanks.
Support First Class Horror on Patreon for as little as $1. Can't get enough of the horror? Carve yourself a deal from official merchandise, only on Teespring. Join us on all social media at First Class Horror. We have such sights to show you.